On the 22nd of June 2001, the Nintendo GameBoy Advance was released in the United Kingdom and became an overnight follow-up success to the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Offering similar specs to the Super Nintendo, but cramming full 16-bit video games into tiny cartridges, a longer battery life, and backwards compatibility with the original Game Boy hardware, the Game Boy Advance quickly made its way into the hands of eager gamers who were ready for expanded handheld experiences with the finesse of matured hardware. Standout franchises such as Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon all triumphantly made their transition to the new console, and the popularity of the system led to several revisions, such as the SP, Micro, and the GameCube player that allowed advanced games to be played on the television. But here's the thing, everybody you know who owned a Game Boy Advance ultimately played the same games. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, Zelda, A Link to the Past, and one of the many Super Mario titles because they were all staples. But because they were so good, people tended to stick with them until they bought a Nintendo DS. But with 1,510 officially licensed games, surely there must be something worth playing today beyond the usual lineup. Surely someone, somewhere made something that is still worth playing today. Well, recently, I took it upon myself to find out. I've already sung my praises about Yu-Gi-Oh! Stairway to the Destined Duel, so I can't include it in this list. But after questioning my friends, scouring message boards, watching reviews, and finally drawing a conclusion, I've come up with this list. Today, I'm going to give you my top picks for the alternative top 10 games you need for the console, plus a few honourable mentions that the editors of this show insisted you take a look at. So let's dive in. Up first is Dynasty Warriors Advance, released by Koei Tecmo Games and Omega Force in 2005. I always felt the design of the home console versions would work well as a portable game, and to my pleasant surprise, it does. Now you might be wondering, how do you take a franchise known for huge battles and a metal soundtrack and squeeze it down to a fraction of the size without making the game tedious? Dynasty Warriors Advance is essentially a mixture of both the traditional Dynasty Warriors games you might find on the PlayStation 2 and the Romance of the Three Kingdoms games you'd find on the Nintendo Famicom, bridging the gap between combat and strategy, appearing here as a pseudo dungeon crawler. Just like the PlayStation 2 games you've come to know and love, you first begin by picking a faction, either Wei, Wu, Shu or other, a fighter, and then battle your way across China in an attempt to control the mainland. To allow for huge battles, the strategic elements take place on an overview of the world, and then the actual fighting takes place within key points on the map. The backgrounds and graphics are adapted from the style of Dynasty Warriors 4, and the game has very fast loading times between transitions and the AI planning a counterattack, which is impressive, even for a cartridge game. The controls are decent too, with the full range of combos for each character, and moveset attacks being readily available to devastate your opponents with some light RPG elements thrown in for good measure. For a game from 2005, the graphics are surprisingly good, the gameplay is consistently smooth, the music is faithful to the original games, and all of the key missions such as the Yellow Turban Rebellion and Hulao Gate all make an appearance. Despite being criminally overlooked at the time of its release, I think Dynasty Warriors Advance is worth a try for an average selling price of around £8. 10-year-old me would have absolutely loved this. Up next is a game that has really found its feet within the retro gaming community, and that's Sonic Advance, developed by Sonic Team and published by Infogrames in 2002, the same team that would put together V-Rally 2. Now between us girls, the idea of a fast-moving sprite on a relatively small screen with hazards around every corner doesn't sound that appealing. However, this game absolutely pulls it off, and I completely take back my reservations, and so should you. This game knocks it out of the park. Spanning across 8 unique levels and a special stage, you take control of Sonic, Tails, Knuckles and Amy Rose in the tried and tested style of gameplay you've come to know and love in your quest to top Dr. Robotnik, just this time, portably. The gameplay is incredibly smooth, the controls are responsive, the levels have good pacing, and the music is absolutely stellar. Each character's arc takes around 2 hours to complete, with a good use of speed, verticality, and light puzzle solving throughout to give each level a unique feel. You also have access to the Chow Garden, which is a nice change of pace from the character's arc, with a small variety of minigames. You can even link the GBA to the GameCube and 3 other systems in this mode for some multiplayer, which is a nice bonus. I'm genuinely surprised this isn't available as a physical release on the Nintendo 3DS or Nintendo Switch as a standalone game or as part of a collection, especially as the game has 2 direct sequels that the retro gaming community also highly praises. The aspect that impressed me most was just how close this feels to the roots of the franchise on the Sega Mega Drive. This game doesn't feel tacked on or rushed out at all. These stages could have easily been in Sonic 2 or 3, and it makes the game feel like an expansion pack to those original games rather than a complimentary offering to make a few quid. Overall, Sonic Advance has a lot to offer, and at roughly £6 a pop you'd be mad not to give it a spin, especially when it's so easy to find. This is a game I can wholeheartedly approve of. Bomberman Tournament is the RPG you've never heard of and absolutely need to play. Released in 2001 by Hudson Soft and published by Activision, Bomberman Tournament puts the classic arcade hero in a Pokemon-style world, complete with towns to visit, monsters to battle, and treachery around every corner. The game functions as a typical RPG with a simple but punchy plot. Bomberman has landed on the planet Frontarion after receiving a distress call from Dr. Ein and must stop the 5 dastardly bombers from Super Bomberman 2 and 3 from destroying the planet. Using different energy sources on the planet, such as the ice fields and desert, the bombers begin enslaving the people in their Carabons, and it's up to Bomberman to free the towns, unite the monsters, and harness their abilities in order to save the day. The game looks excellent on a small display, is perfect for playing in short bursts, and is interesting and challenging enough to keep you entertained without consuming your entire life. The game can be finished in roughly 6 hours, which is fairly short for an RPG, but with the simplification of the battle system and side quests, the game feels fairly substantial and exploration and returning to areas feels necessary and like a surprisingly natural walk rather than forced progress. Instead of earning XP through battling, your Carabon levels up with you as you bomb your way through the game, and their abilities can even be used on the overworld and dungeons to protect yourself or get the drop on boss fights. It reminds me a lot of the original Legend of Zelda, somewhat updated for the Bomberman universe. Also included on the cartridge is a dedicated battle mode, which is more akin to the traditional Bomberman format players of my generation would come to expect from the series, most notably building upon the success of games like Saturn Bomberman, with a variety of stages, items to choose from, and even a 4-player link cable option. You might find yourself playing this mode in between sections of the main game as the challenge is spot on. The experience can be customised from the players available, to the items you find, to the speed of the match as a whole. It's incredibly versatile. In reality, even if Bomberman Tournament was just this mode, it would still be worth buying as it's the Saturn and PlayStation gameplay you've come to love, transported expertly to the Game Boy Advance. In my firm opinion, £8 is an absolute steal for a game that will surprise you and keep you entertained. This one is definitely worth a look if you want a cheap and easy RPG to get into on the go. Now this will come as a surprise to most, but I actually prefer GT Advance Championship Racing over Mario Kart Super Circuit. Developed by MTO and published by THQ in 2001 as a GBA launch title, GT Advance Championship Racing is a decent attempt at bringing a Gran Turismo-esque experience to the Game Boy Advance, wearing the dress of GT Cube for the Nintendo GameCube. Using a Mode 7 F-Zero style engine, GT Advance is able to replicate pseudo 3D environments with a solid frame rate, unique tracks with licensed cars, and the ability to alter gameplay depending on the weather and surface type. The controls are easy to learn, the sliding technique is incredibly fun, and the track shape and design encourages high speed and cornering instead of technical driving, which is a huge plus on the Game Boy Advance's small screen. The AI is also quite smart. Unlike other games where the computer simply follows the fastest line, in this game the AI learns from you and will actively adapt to try and counter you and try and push you off the road. After each race, you unlock a new car and a specific upgrade for the car you raced in. Over time, you can convert your family sedan or hatchback into a Series A race car, which adds huge replayability to the game. GT Advance is the kind of game you can pick up and play for 15 minutes and feel like you've made genuine progress. There's even a 2-player battle option, which again works better than expected with quick loading times and decent latency. Just be sure to pick up the Japanese version, as the UK and US release cheaped out by not including a battery backup. This title is worth a shot, especially when it can be found for under £10. Most people don't know this, but an extremely well made adaptation of the Metal Slug arcade series found its way to the Game Boy Advance and is absolutely worth a second look. Developed and produced by SNK in 2004, Metal Slug Advance takes the best pieces of the Metal Slug Neo Geo series and blends them together into a portable adventure that plays just like the arcade game with some light RPG elements thrown in. Taking the role of a new male or female recruit, you are deployed on the battlefield with the task of recapturing your training island after it has been taken by force by the dastardly General Morden. For those of you who haven't played a Metal Slug game before, the objective of the game is to clear the screen of bad guys as fast as possible and defeat a variety of mini-bosses and large vehicles along the way. To make the game slightly more approachable, the game swaps out the one-hit kills as seen in the arcade game and replaces those with a life bar and continues, which makes the game much more approachable on the go. Prior to each mission, you are given a basic overview of the level and a list of potential cards to find. If you can find these cards, you can power up your soldier, unlock new metal slugs, and discover hidden features. It's a really cool touch. I especially enjoy the boss fights throughout these stages. The sprites are able to take up the entire screen alongside the soldiers, leading to plenty of tense fights. True to the Neo Geo series it's based upon, Metal Slug Advance feels exactly like its arcade older brother, boasting excellent hand-drawn graphics, catchy music, and a solid frame rate with intuitive controls. It's incredibly strange to see a game of this quality on the Game Boy Advance, but it really goes to show what can be achieved with such minimal hardware. This game feels like a premium experience, and will run you around roughly retail at £30 to £40 online, but if you're serious about the kind of experience you want on the GBA, this is definitely one to consider. Doom needs no formal introductions. As one of the defining first-person shooters, it paved the way for games like Medal of Honor, Halo, and Time Splitters, but its 2001 adaptation to the GBA is an impressive effort that I actually want to play the next time you're taking the train. Developed by ID Software themselves and converted by David A. Palmer Designs, as a lone space marine, it is up to you to close the portal that is open to Hell to ensure the survival of planet Earth. With only your pistol and wits about you must navigate the moon bases and later Hell, collecting firearms and keys and gunning down the armies that hunt you down to complete your objective. Featuring 23 levels, a handful of exclusive multiplayer maps, and a fairly faithful rendition of the original DOS game, Doom offers a decent frame rate, tight controls, and a fair amount of challenge on the go. Built upon the Atari Jaguar version of Doom, it's genuinely amazing to see what the tiny GBA can do when the correct people are on the job. Especially when you compare the infamous Super Nintendo version to Doom on the GBA, the portable version looks and plays far better despite the specs being roughly the same. Now whilst a few of the levels had to be compromised in order to fit on the cartridge, it in no way compromises the overall experience. Doom is far better than you'd expect, especially with the amount of buttons available on the console. I do however recommend using the GBA SP as the shoulder buttons are far more shallow, which allows for precise movement that you want in a game like this. The game can be finished casually in around 3 hours, but if you're still hungry for more, Doom 2 is also on the GBA and both games feature an excellent multiplayer co-op and deathmatch function, totaling around 50 levels, which is more than enough on the go. If you're in the market for a decent portable FPS, this is a title you should absolutely consider picking up. £15 is an absolute bargain for what's on offer here, but just be sure to make sure that your copy is legitimate, as like Pokemon and Advance Wars, the pirates love to recreate copies of this one and pass them off as the real deal. Crash XS has developed a bit of a cult following in recent years, and for good reason. Released in 2002 by Vicarious Visions and published by Universal Interactive, Crash XS attempts to bring the 3D Crash Bandicoot experience to the GBA with a 2D perspective, and it's actually my go-to pick up and play alternative to the Super Mario series. Adapting levels, music, and enemies from the PlayStation games, Crash XS is a fairly faithful addition to the series. The game is structured in the same fashion as Crash Bandicoot 3, Warped, for the Sony PlayStation, and once converted into a 2D platformer, works really well on the Nintendo handheld. Dr. Neo Cortex is once again after the crystals, and it's up to Crash and his friends to travel through a variety of stages in order to stop him in his tracks. With a healthy variety of platforming, swimming, and flying stages, Crash XS certainly gives the player a lot to do. The 25 levels on offer here feel deliberate and thought out, and the controls are absolutely spot on. I find that the levels are just long enough for my life to mean something, and for the game to give me that sense of achievement that I want for outfoxing the designers. Crash XS is the only other game outside of The Wrath of Cortex on the PlayStation 2 that I've ever wanted to return to for fun and to collect all of the gems and time keys, which is a testament to the game's design, especially being on a portable console. At £9 a pop, this title is definitely one you should consider, as the gameplay, challenge, and nostalgia factor work together beautifully and are going to keep you entertained and talking about the game for hours to come. Every now and then you come across a game that genuinely impresses you. I would be doing you a dishonour by not telling you about Gunstar Superheroes. The game is a direct sequel to the run-and-gun action platformer Gunstar Heroes on the Sega Mega Drive. Released in 2005, legendary development studio Treasure teamed up with Sega to develop one of the most technically impressive titles for the GBA that will make even the most avid Pokemon fan turn their head. Following the events of the previous game, the Gunstar heroes must travel across the moons in their solar system, stop the resurrected Empire, and recapture the treasure gems from the evil organisation, the Third Eye. Boasting incredible scale and rotation, huge amounts of sprites on screen at once, and a rock-solid frame rate, from the moment you start the game you are thrown straight into the action with seemingly endless amounts of enemies to defeat in a whole host of unique environments with different gameplay styles. It's really impressive. On the fly, you can switch between 3 unique weapons that can be powered up and use a special attack. Learning what gun to use in what situation is not only essential for survival, but also incredibly fun to figure out. The boss fights are also plentiful, with a new, huge, ridiculous mechanised monster around every corner. There seems to be so much variety and ways to experience the stages and hidden things to find. It's just a title that keeps on giving. The total completion time of the game is around 6 hours, which feels like a decent amount of time to run through all the characters and explore the bonus content. In my opinion, Gunstar Superheroes offers excellent gameplay, excellent music, and matches the kind of quality you'd expect from a consoleized Treasure game. And whilst its asking price of £40 online is high, it's absolutely worth it. Gunstar Superheroes is a game that gives even the best Nintendo DS games a run for their money. Probably the most surprising entry on this list is Tekken Advance, a game that in my opinion actually rivals the PlayStation source material it's based upon. Developed in-house by Namco themselves and published in the UK by Infogrames in 2002, Tekken Advance is a sort of adaptation of Tekken 3 on the original PlayStation and becomes an ultra simplification of the Tekken franchise on the go, providing most of the characters at the start, streamlines the button combinations, and places a huge emphasis on delivering the wow factor in short bursts. The game feels incredibly similar to Tekken 3, with excellent graphics, backgrounds that feature parallax scrolling, and a decent soundtrack. This title feels like what those Tiger handheld games promised, but never actually delivered. Tekken Advance is like a mini arcade machine in your pocket. The aspect that impressed me most was just how fluent the gameplay is. For example, in the PlayStation game, holding up and right and tapping circle when using martial law allows you to do a bicycle kick. In this game, the buttons you imagine to be tapping to achieve the combo do actually achieve the combo. It's a strange system that translates really well to a 2-button system and makes this game incredibly easy to approach, especially for older players or people who are new to Tekken in general. The game also appears to be running at a solid 60 frames per second, which looks genuinely amazing on the Game Boy Advance screen, especially when stages such as the winter level provide convincing 3D on the console. It's especially impressive when you consider that this appearance is maintained when using a link cable. That can't be an easy feat. In my opinion, £12 is an absolute bargain for a game of this quality. When you pick this one up, you'll be genuinely surprised what your GBA can do with the right developer. I get requests to talk about this game all the time, and for good reason. Developed by Digital Eclipse, who would later go on to make the Sega Mega Drive collections, and Universal Interactive Studios, Spyro Season of Ice brings the Purple Dragon's adventures to a portable world by placing him in an isometric landscape, akin to the Beyblade games. In this title, while Spyro, Sparks, Bianca, and Hunter are on holiday, Spyro receives a distress call from Zoe, the fairy that zaps you to save your progress in the PlayStation game, that Grendor, the game's villain, is kidnapping the world's fairies and that you need to spring into action to save her and her friends. Like the PlayStation games Spyro is based upon, you move around the homeworld talking to characters, picking levels, collecting gems, defeating bad guys, and searching for the boss at the end of each area. The gameplay is quite solid, with a good use of colour, music, and sound effects from the original games reworked for the GBA. There's a sense of light puzzle solving, light platforming, and a comfortable pace throughout, which makes the game a casual game to pick up and play. There's even a section dedicated to playing as Sparks, which gives the game a good amount of variety. The isometric effect can make traversing the level a challenge, and sometimes the screen feels a little bit too zoomed in, but to compensate, the game remains fairly easy and provides lots of lives, sheep, and scattered gems to keep you moving forward, which keeps the game approachable when sitting on a train. Overall, Spyro for the GBA feels like a good adaptation of the source material and feels like what Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Mega Drive and Saturn wanted to be, and for a game from 2001 when a lot of people were still playing Game Boy Color, is a very decent entry into the GBA's library that's worth a second look. Now, if none of the games have convinced you yet there is fun to be had on the Game Boy Advance, Castlevania Circle of the Moon should be considered the ace in the hole. Developed and produced in-house by Konami in 2001, Castlevania Circle of the Moon serves as a direct sequel to the award-winning Castlevania Symphony of the Night on the Sony PlayStation. Without question, Circle of the Moon offers one of the best portable stories in the GBA with excellent graphics and sprite work, an excellent remix soundtrack based upon the NES games, and an 8-hour story you can sink your teeth into. Dracula has once again been resurrected, this time by his loyal servant Camilla. In order to complete the ritual, she masterminds a plan to lure the Baldwin vampire slayers to the castle in order to defeat them before Dracula regains his full power. After being separated during the initial battle, the son of Maurice Baldwin and his apprentice, Nathan Graves, must split up to stop Dracula's rebirth ritual as quickly as possible. Being the first of its kind in the portable Castlevania franchise, Circle of the Moon is often considered to be the mould in which other Metroidvania-style games should be cut from. At the start of the game, you begin with just your whip and must quickly make your way around the castle to find power-ups, side weapons, and unique DDS cards that allow your whip to change elements. Some combinations allow for a huge damage boost, and others allow you to freeze enemies to use as platforms, while some rare cards allow you to attack bosses from further away. You can collect cards by defeating the standard enemies around the map, which encourage you to explore every last inch of the castle. The most impressive aspect of this game is the sheer amount of variety and detail of the locations found within the castle. Everything feels unique, distinct, and designed with purpose, and even though you're only in one building, it feels like an entire world. Circle of the Moon has an excellent pace, and the gameplay and control feels absolutely spot on. It feels just like playing the NES games, just with more to do and more boss fights to take on. The game is epic. For me, the game works so well because it wasn't designed as a bigger game that then had to squeeze down. Instead, it was built first as a GBA game and then piled on as many PlayStation features and accessories as possible, and it pays huge dividends. Whilst this game will set you back around retail, around £40 for a loose copy, it's absolutely worth your time. It's a solid RPG with excellent graphics, music, gameplay, and a solid frame rate throughout, and should firmly have a place on your to-do list. Now there are hundreds of potential titles for me to introduce you to, so akin to the style of the virtual gaming library, I'm going to list several games here that I think are worth your time, but that we don't have time to dive into fully today. So that's my list for the alternative top 10 games you should try for the Nintendo GameBoy Advance. Whilst I, just like you, most probably grew up with the Pokemon series and would happily defend them to the end, I'm happy to report there is more out there to play with a similar standard of quality. Although some of the games on this list are on the more expensive side, I would still encourage you to go and look for them, as compared to other systems, you're never going to spend more than £50, and with titles such as Tekken Advance on the cards, they're simply worth a shot for their comparatively modest asking price. Hey! Thanks for watching this episode of SnapbackWill. As always, I'd like to thank all of the lovely people you see on screen now for lending their time and effort into the production of this video. In total, I've played around 300 games, and it wouldn't have been possible without their direction and guidance. In the next episode, we're going to be taking a look at my alternative picks for the Nintendo NES. See you there!